Hello, dear listeners. Before we get started, a quick logistical note from future Rachel reminding you that it is not a real podcast unless you periodically apologize for the sound quality. We messed up our microphone settings in this one. I apologize. It starts off fine, but the land and dread possibilities. We made a mistake with our microphone settings. There's more background noise than usual. It's still perfectly listenable, but there's a noticeable dip in quality, and then the parting thoughts start, and you go, oh, wow, a weight I didn't even know was there has been lifted. So, apologizing in advance for that. Still perfectly listenable, and we know exactly what we did, so the next episode should be fine. Enjoy! The Wonderful World of Darklords, Report 13, Nottingham. I did not look forward to visiting the town of Nottingham with any particular enthusiasm. I had heard rumors about Prince John's rapacious taxation and the poverty and desperation that resulted. It disgusted me in the Pride Lands, and it disgusts me here. I had seen its like before. Sherwood Forest was another matter. Having just come from the Queenswood, I was no stranger to dark and forbidding forests, but Sherwood's threats were more mundane, if perhaps even deadlier. Every caravan I saw was armed and guarded as if for war, and one soldier, after ensuring that I did not howl at the touch of silver, insisted that I travel with them for my own safety. I agreed, and soon saw why the group was so cautious. A mile down the road, we found bodies draped over the trees, or what was left of them, for they had largely been devoured. Around their necks were signs reading "Collaborator," and arrows were arranged at the bases of the trees, almost like offerings. Prince John may be the regent in name, but it is the outlaws of Sherwood who truly rule this land.
Welcome to Wonderful World of Darklords. I'm Tom.
I'm Rachel.
And we're discussing how to convert Disney movies to Ravenloft domains of dread, and have been for a whole year. Welcome to Season 2, y'all!
Happy anniversary! Happy anniversary! Happy anniversary! Happy anniversary! Along the way, we'll look at the Darklord, the domain itself, and some plot hooks and adaptation ideas to integrate the setting into your own campaign.
Today's episode, Robin Hood.
Forgot, I still had a line to say.
Yeah. In case you weren't aware, it's our anniversary.
June 13th,
yeah,
2022
June 13th.
Was The Lion King.
And speaking of The Lion King, we way back when we started planning episodes, we were trying to figure out, we want to do something special for our 2nd June, our anniversary, or episode 13. And we realized we knew we wanted to start with The Lion King. And then we said, you know what? Disney has another movie about a Lion King. About a monarchical lion. And not just a monarchical lion.
A scrawny monarchical lion with an inferiority complex because everyone likes his older brother better.
So we realized there is one obvious choice for our second. Sadly, they don't have another one of these for our 3rd anniversary, but...
Might do Jungle Book for the Great Cat.
Yes, yes, indeed. But here we are, one of the great Disney movies of the 70s, one of the most quotable Disney movies, just a sheer delight of a movie, Robin Hood.
Speaking of being quotable, Dusty Purple has been doing bingo cards. We're recording this all the way back in April. I really hope you did Oo-de-lally for the free space, because Oo-de-lally.
Oo-de-lally. There, that's 3 free.
We love you, Dusty Purple. You're awesome.
Yes, get the bingo cards. Come on our Discord, get our bingo cards.
You were so great.
It's bizarre that we have bingo cards. So.
But wonderful. Thank you, Dusty Purple.
Quick opening note. This is one where, as I mentioned, this film is an absolute delight, and it is one that does not have really much in the way of horror, and indeed has this very fun, silly, and swashbuckling adventure tone, and that's great. It's one of the reasons it's so much fun to watch, but it is a little bit of a problem from our perspective. So we're telling you right up now, this is our 2nd Lion King episode. But unlike The Lion King, we're not having everyone be animals, because we're just using Disney's Robin Hood as a gate, as a key, as a way of accessing the entire canon of literature. So yeah, Disney's Robin Hood maybe doesn't necessarily make a great Ravenloft domain, but it is a major archetype of literature. It's one of the foundational stories of the English canon, and there's been many, many, many iterations. And when you open that up, you have much more possibility for a horror-themed or more Ravenloft-appropriate version.
Yeah, because I don't think any of us want to see dark and edgy Disney's Robin Hood. fox who gave a lot of people feelings is going to be drinking human blood now. Yep. Anything we're saying about any of these characters, we're going to be talking about like the merry men being like brutal guerrillas and whatnot. Spoilers. We're not talking about like
Baloo's not
Chicken Al and a Dale.
Phil Silver.
Yeah,
he's not Baloo. So Little John here is not Baloo. We're drawing from a lot of different iterations of Robin Hood, and right off the bat, we're not having them be animals like animal people like with Lion King. With Lion King, I think that was really important aesthetically and thematically. The idea of nature and the connection to nature is a huge theme of that movie and of that setting of ours. You should listen to it if you haven't yet.
Although the sound quality is bad, there's one part where I still need to go back and fix that. I didn't get the music synced right. So.
But that hopefully using that Disney animated Robin Hood, opening up the rest of Robin Hood, we can come up with a good Robin Hood themed domain. Even if it's not necessarily super strictly a Disney's Robin Hood themed domain.
Even if it's really not in any way a Disney's Robin Hood themed domain.
Except you should do a Peter Ustinov impression for Prince John.
Yes.
So speaking of Prince John, he is the phony King of England, but he is not the phony Darklord of our domain. And we'll talk all about that in a section we like to call The Lord.
The Lord. I have met a tremendous variety of rulers over the past years, from the dark majesty of Maleficent to the preening boorishness of Gaston, but I have never seen one quite like Prince John. Even the literal spoiled child king of Neverland cuts a more impressive figure than Nottingham's pathetic regent. Incredible as he is inept, Prince John taxes the people mercilessly to support his lavish lifestyle, yet cannot command their respect, obedience, or even fear. An interminable audience with him proved him to be craven, vain, petulant. In short, most of the negative qualities I have encountered over the past year, with none of the grandeur. Apparently, his elder brother Richard left Nottingham some years ago to fight a war, and Prince John seized power in his place. He demands to be recognized as the rightful king, but few will even go so far as to grant him the title of regent in any but the most formal settings. Should anyone mention King Richard in Prince John's presence, they will experience a fit of pique that seems more befitting of a nursery than a throne room. That being said, I was frankly shocked by the level of open contempt that the people of Nottingham showed for Prince John. They mock him in the streets, singing songs and performing plays about his foolishness and cowardice. Apparently, Prince John expected this disrespect to abate when he killed the folk hero Robin Hood, but it only worsened. Particularly since Robin Hood's body was never found, leading to the popular tale that Prince John fabricated his death to burnish his own self-image. For his part, Prince John seems to have no idea how to retaliate beyond imposing heavier and heavier taxes, sending those who default to debtor's prison. I have no idea what he intends to do when the people have no more money to pay. Even Prince John's own ostensible supporters mock him behind his back, from the sheriff to the lowliest of the town guards. The soldier who invited me to join the caravan performed a painfully accurate impression of the prince, to the delight of his fellows. I kept waiting for him to show the slightest sign of fear that he would be overheard, or for one of the other soldiers to defend the regent's worthiness, but nothing of the sort happened. I finally asked why, if he were so wretched, they bothered to follow him, and was answered only with genial laughter and a few comments about the pay. My eldritch sight suggested they were under some sort of charm. A pity for Prince John that it seemed to grant only the basest form of loyalty.
So if you are listening, and presumably you've seen Disney's Robin Hood, because it's one of the most best-loved Disney films of that era, and if not, you should. It's quite delightful.
Really fun.
Do you know who Prince John is? And you know that he's the best. He just... absolute best. You know his thoughts on taxes. But you may not know, if you clicked on it furthermore, the Disney, the Robin Hood, then the Ravenloft, what a Darklord is. So, Rachel, what is a Darklord?
Well, a Darklord is an evil being that commits some kind of act of ultimate darkness, and the dark powers say, well, hello, new friend, we want to play with you forever and ever. And so they plunk them into a domain that is a special hell tailor-made just for them. I've been saying this for a year now.
Yeah, right. 13th go. 14th if you count Mater.
There are good darklords and not so good darklords, speaking of Mater and our rundown of Uruk von Karkov in that one. We've come up with 4 qualities that we see as kind of the summing up the best of the darklords. So we're going to real quick run through those and how they apply to Strahd, since he's the darklord. And then we're going to talk about how we apply those 4 qualities to Prince John to make him a darklord in the model of Strahd. So the first of those qualities is that act of ultimate darkness. And in Strahd's case, he wasn't jealous of his older brother, he was jealous of his younger brother, who was...
Told you not to mention his name!
So he killed his younger brother in order to get with his fiancée. Our second quality is what they call in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft the Torment, because we're a Disney podcast, we call it they got what they wanted, they lost what they had. Strahd, Sergei is out of the way, so he's a vampire, he's got all his vampire powers, and there's nothing standing between him and Tatiana except the fact that she jumped out of a building to get away from him, and will continue to do so through multiple incarnations. Our third is an element of tragedy or relatability. They're not just evil for the sake of evil. There's kind of a twinge of sympathy that we get. And in Strahd's case, it's just... imagine being that into somebody.
Yeah.
And they jump out of a building
to get away from you. And always do.
And always do. Like, unrequited love is just, it's awful. And that's like, super hyper-reality unrequited love. Mm-hmm. And then our last element is that the domain reflects the Dark Lord and their torment in some way. So Strahd is the Dark Lord of Barovia, which is creepy vampire land. He is not the Dark Lord of Harakir. And Barovia, it keeps talking about how it's boring for him, it's very lonely, he doesn't really have any peers there, because part of his curse is that loneliness of not being with Tatiana, and so that loneliness is just reflected for him everywhere.
So while we mentioned that Robin Hood the movie tonally is tricky to do in this sort of Ravenloft setting, Prince John as a Dark Lord isn't. In fact, this is one of those ones where this was the first batch where we were just kind of doing this as a thought experiment for fun. Just talking about how to convert Disney movies into Ravenloft domains and hadn't decided to monetize it yet. So, first, the Act of Ultimate Darkness, and this is also where we are kind of getting our version of the story. Now, this is not a full-on AU. It sort of is. But it's also kind of that, villain triumphant thing. This is the villain wins. And the Act of Ultimate Darkness is a little weird because it's kind of a composite Act of Ultimate Darkness. Because everything goes along according to the movie, but then when you have the really greatly done escape scene of Robin Hood escaping from the burning castle, very suspenseful, and he goes in the water and they're shooting the arrows, and then he comes up and they say, Oo-de-lally. In our version... Prince John, to the best of his knowledge, killed Robin. Robin Hood never came up.
Yeah, he went under the water, he never came out of the water.
So eventually the people and the merry men ran away. Prince John just, capered and with delight that he had done. I did it! I won! Killed Robin Hood! Hope if Prince John's on your bingo card, Prince John impressions on your bingo card, you are in luck, my friend. So that's the moment the mist come in. That's the moment we have Nottingham splits into Ravenloft. That's not a really huge act of ultimate darkness to stop this greed-clad fox from home invading who broke into your castle and stole all your money. So we're sort of compositing that with the idea that also he had jailed everybody. He was brutally oppressing the people, and also, the real act of ultimate darkness here is the planning to hang Friar Tuck. Mm-hmm. He knew he was basically innocent. He was not hanging him for any kind of crime he committed. He was just going to hang him as a way to flush out Robin Hood. That's a legit act of ultimate darkness.
Even Sir Hiss was shocked.
Yeah. So, that is sort of morally the act of ultimate darkness Prince John commits in the story, but timeline-wise and sort of for reasons we want it to be the killing Robin Hood. It's sort of the weekend of ultimate darkness. If this is bugging you, you can make the story work by having it be that, after that he hangs Friar Tuck anyway, and that would be even more an act of ultimate darkness. We have stuff we want to do with Friar Tuck, and also we like him, so we're not doing that. Or
you could say that it was a domain and went into Ravenloft when the end of the movie happened.
Yeah, there you go.
The last, 15 minutes of the movie, it's a domain.
Mm-hmm,
so.
Yeah. But, so we sort of have a composite act of ultimate darkness, but the key thing is that's our divergent point. There's no, And then King Richard came back.
King Richard came back and fixed it.
Fixed everything. Boy, I love it when isn't it great when things just sort of work themselves out? When the villain's just kind of thwarted by circumstance.
Off screen.
Then Prince John tripped and broke his neck, and everything just kind of got better. So that never happened. Prince John still rules Nottingham. Robin Hood is gone. He's not doing any kind of public appearances. And so that is kind of transitioning into our torment. That he got what he wanted, he lost what he had. So he got what he wanted. He's king. He gets the big crown. Everyone obeys him. He has the infinite supply of rhino soldiers. He's collecting all the beautiful, lovely taxes. He killed Robin Hood. But he lost what he had, in none of it helped. They never, found Robin Hood's body, so we're saying that there are these, stories that Robin Hood's still alive. And, most of the common people believe Robin Hood is still alive. So he doesn't even, get the victory. He won, but nobody believes it.
Well, because he's Prince John.
Right, who would believe?
King of England.
Who would believe?
A pox on the phony King of England.
A pox on the phony King of England. So, in the kind of, objective write-up, never getting with Tatiana way, it's this whole, he will kind of never be able to stamp out Robin Hood's legend. That even if he killed Robin Hood, the people believe Robin Hood's alive, and he can never stop that.
And even if he finds the body at this point, clearly it's a trick.
Yeah, it's some kind of trick, yeah.
He killed some other random fox and dressed him in his clothes.
A year or two has gone by, it's just going to be a dead body. Yeah. Yeah. And beyond that, it's part of the deeper torment, which is he's Prince John, and he has to wake up every day and be Prince John. Just everyone hates him, everyone looks down on him, everyone has contempt for him, he's the phony King of England. You can't bribe or bully, respect, or loathe. He wants so badly to be respected, or beyond that, he wants to be feared, and they're not even really afraid of him. They're afraid of being punished by him. They're afraid of what he can do to them, but no one's afraid of him.
And there's also the, thing that we get with Prince John that we couldn't do with Scar, because King Richard's alive.
Yeah.
And, he never is going to come back, because that's part of Prince John's torment. If he comes back, the torment's over. But Prince John knows he's out there somewhere and might come back at any time. Right,
in which case he'll be in his striped pajamas, breaking rocks.
One of the things that we looked into when we were looking at different Robin Hood legends was Ivanhoe, because Robin Hood and Prince John and all of that show up in Ivanhoe. And at one point, Prince John hears that, King Richard has escaped from a jail he was in, and he actually faints.
Yeah. So, he's the king, and he has all the money, he has all the power on paper. But every day he wakes up and knows that everyone hates him, no one respects him, everyone thinks he's the phony King of England. Even, you have Sir Hiss and the Sheriff singing the phony King of England song and talking about what a chump their boss is. Even the people that do his will to punish the people disobeying him have no respect for him at all, are just kind of in it for the money.
And that, the historical Prince John, the reason that he didn't end up going to prison in striped pajamas and became king later, was because King Richard came back and said, oh, well, he's just a child who was led astray by bad advisors. He was 25 years old, 25, 27, somewhere in there. But he would always be a child.
Yeah. Got the book, the Disney Villains book, and there was a line about it that Prince John is worried that history will pass him by and he'll never make his mark. And you have echoes of that in the fortune-telling scene. He's so excited at this idea that he'll go down, down, down in history. And there's two scenes, they're both related, kind of in the castle, that kind of approach Ravenloft-y darklordness. And it's the one right before he decides to hang Friar Tuck, right after the sheriff captures Friar Tuck in the church. And he's just kind of sitting, surrounded by money, just seething. Because he knows everyone is laughing at him. And knowing that everyone is laughing at you behind your back, even the people that, are your employees. Imagine being a supervillain, you know that even your minions laugh at you behind your back. That's torment, and that's also our element of tragedy and relatability. That we've all been petty, we've all lashed out when we feel mocked or disrespected. Like I said, when I said that, didn't you feel a little stab of sympathy there?
Yeah.
With you're an evil supervillain dictator arresting people and being horrible and executing people, but everybody's laughing at you, and even your minions are laughing at you. And just one of the most horrible things is that idea of their people are laughing at you behind your back.
Yeah.
And they are. Like, that sort of being a nervous teenager. That's his life. It's real. No, everyone is laughing at him behind his back.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a pretty good element of tragedy and relatability right there. Then finally we have the domain reflecting the Darklord, the personality, the curse. Sometimes there's the very obvious aesthetic reflection, like Rachel mentioned. Strahd is the king of spooky vampire theme park. And it's everything Hammer, Dracula, Transylvania. That there's Lemortia is Frankenstein's and body experiments and weird experiments and reanimated corpses and ice, because that's what we know about Frankenstein.
Elsa's got her icebound heart. And
Right, yeah, exactly.
Like
everything's frozen, yeah.
We had one of those for us.
Yes, thank you. Good example. But this one, it's more about the domain reflects the torment. He is the sovereign of a land full of people disrespecting him everywhere, even his own men, that he has no control. That we have it's connected with the torment. We're using this as sort of the situation of the inherent torment of the kind of occupier in a guerrilla war. That no, he has no control, he has no real authority, no one respects him, and that is kind of how this situation is set up. It's not so much the aesthetic surface reflection as it is the sort of situation we're going to talk about in Nottingham is very much this externalization of his torment.
Yeah.
Kind of more like we did with The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Frollo, which you should listen to if you haven't. It's really good.
Even though it's very long.
It's very long. Just believe us, it's worth it. So he is the phony king of England, and no one respects him. But you know who does respect him? The Dark Powers.
No,
they really don't. They don't respect anyone. But they respect him enough to have given him some special powers.
They did give him some special powers.
So Rachel, tell us about his special powers.
This was hard.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Most Disney villains are at least, charismatic and have minions that respect them.
Yeah, it's like we can always go to the Well of Charm powers. Like, even a Haggard, we could give him the Red Bull.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
This is just... We racked our brains for a while trying to come up with powers for Prince John.
You got this. This was good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason I'm taking point on this was because this was all me. So I had an apostrophe. Lightning had struck my brains. So the first thing that kind of came into place for it was with the scene where the sheriff, he goes and he's gathering the money, and he always knows who has money.
Yes.
Like, he hears the clanging in Otto's cast as Otto is thumping along, and he's banging it out, and he knows that there's still more in there.
Right.
He knows exactly how much is in there. And then, he magically shows up at Timmy's doorstep.
When he gets the coin. He
always knows where there's going to be money. So we had that as a thing that Prince John can sense gold in his domain. He always knows where money is. And he's been able to supernaturally share this power with the sheriff. And then the big breakthrough...
This was amazing.
Thank you. It was a couple different things kind of coming together for both from watching the movie and we're digging into some stuff with the historical Prince John and the this and the that, and what we ended up coming up with, or what I ended up coming up. I'm not gonna do false modesty here.
Yeah.
Was that if he pays you from the royal treasury, if you are on his payroll, then when you take that money, then you are under a Gesh spell. Gesh spell. A year later, we've learned from our mistakes.
Yep,
We're pronouncing it right.
See? It's all a circle.
Unlike Darklords, we learned from our mistakes.
Yes.
And that Gesh spell forces loyalty. And so that's why you've got, even though no one respects him and likes him, he's got all of those Rhino guards, and the Rhino guards are just completely unquestioningly loyal. Or, Sir Hiss and the sheriff can't stand him, but it clearly has never crossed their minds to betray him. They're completely loyal to him, even though they think he's pathetic and ridiculous. So it has a 30-day duration, and that means that he's constantly having to pay everyone again, in order to keep this going, which means that he has to keep the taxes up, and so he's constantly having to kind of raising the taxes higher to be getting this money out. So he can't even enjoy the money he has.
Yeah.
And also, Tom made the realization that this means if their loyalty is compelled by gold, then he doesn't even have that.
Right, exactly. He knows they're not really... The Rhino Guards always obey him, but he knows he doesn't even really have their loyalty. And this is kind of a Ravenloft-y, D&D, magicizing... The kind of one of the core things we're trying to tap into here, which I mentioned, is the sort of torment of the occupier. That, like, you need money. The only way you're maintaining power is through this military force you have, which you have to pay. Like, they don't have any kind of loyalty or real respect for you. You just have to pay them. And in order to do that, you need more money, which in order to do that, you need to oppress the people, which means they're pushing back against you more, which means you are stuck trying to expand this military force. It's that wonderful, beautiful Ravenloft horrible spiral of oppressing the people means he needs a military, which means he needs to oppress the people to pay the military, but with a little Ravenloft magic on it.
I mentioned it was part of this was some of the historical sources. So the historical Prince John, when he was King John, he had a lot of wars that he got into, and that was part of why his taxes were so high. And if you have a bee like this internal war, then it's even more of a thing, and it's delicious.
Then it makes the beautiful spiral of he's every day he's robbing Peter to pay Paul. He's robbing Otto the blacksmith to pay the sheriff to rob Otto the blacksmith to pay the sheriff.
And then, speaking of the sheriff, he's pretty much just a dude. Hiss, on the other hand, we don't see him do a whole lot, but we know that he is an enchanter. You know, he does have, in the movie, it mentions that he hypnotized King Richard, and that's why King Richard ran up to fight in the Crusades. So he's clearly got these powerful enchantment abilities. And in the Disney Villains book that Tom mentioned, they had originally planned for Hiss to be a more sinister figure before they decided to really just go straight goofy. And we're trying to make everyone more sinister, so this is great for us.
Yeah, right.
And so it was going to be a whole thing where Hiss could be anywhere and ever, like he was always hiding, he was always spying. You get a little bit of this with when he, goes in the balloon and floats himself up and everything. That's the remnants. So, again, since we're trying to make it more sinister, you can keep that, you can bring that over and have it be that, Hiss is always using his magic to spy and to, kind of like force people to tell him things. And
be a lot of invisibility.
And then, for closing the borders, we are taking a thing from what they did with Falkovnia, the older material, which is, in the older material, bingo, Drakov actually couldn't close the borders. He could send soldiers out, but he couldn't close the borders. And that works perfectly for
Yes, it does.
Because...
As soon as Rachel mentioned that, I was like, that is so perfect.
Yes. Because you know who can close the borders? A real king.
A real king. King Richard could close the borders.
King Richard could have closed the borders.
If he were the Darklord.
But he has no control. He has no control over his land. Everything's in rebellion. Even the land is rebelling against him as a reflection of his torment.
And he's the phony king of England.
He's the phony king of England. And
he knows that on some level. He knows there's this power he should have that he can't. And once again, this is sort of fitting that idea of guerrilla war. He can't metaphorically, politically, militarily close the borders. He can't control the movement along the borders of people moving into and out of his domain. So once again, we're just sprinkling a little Ravenloft magic on that. So in the write-up on the Van Richten guides for the Darklords, we always have the role-playing trait, the ideal, the bond, and the flaw, and they do those as quotes, which is so good for us, because this is, as we mentioned, the most quotable possibly Disney movie of all time.
It's a welcome change from last episode.
Yes, indeed. So, we also want to give you those things in the write-up, which will be free on DM's Guild, the role-playing trait, the ideal, the bond, and flaw. We have prepared our best quotes, our best selections, and our best Peter Ustinov impressions. And yes, I did.
Okay, I was going to say, we won.
I assume you prepared your best Peter Ustinov impression, though. I think that's a fair analysis.
The way I do Ivan isn't Prince John, but it's not. We're both doing Caligula, Peter Ustinov and I. So.
Okay, so the challenge here is to not just do all of Prince John's quotes. I have prepared a series of quotes, and I'm going to give them, and then, Rachel, you can see which you think would be good choices for the role-playing trait, the ideal, the bond, and the flaw. And this is a little like last time, not in terms of quotability, but in terms of a lot of these could be a lot of these,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way it is for all.
Yeah. That's good writing. You know, that like your role-playing trait is your ideal, is your bond, is your flaw.
Yeah, we had a slider puzzle for King Haggard, too.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And I'm not going to just do every quote Prince John does in the movie. But I could. All right.
I don't think you could get PJ. I'm going to get that on my luggage.
No, PJ. Not so hard, you mean thing. Which it kills me to not have that. Well, it's in the episode. Now, this is one of those where we'd have to do some edits, some dots. Mm-hmm. Oh, they are they? Well, they'll be singing a different tune. Double the taxes! Bum, bum, bum. I'm not going to write that out, but you know it's there. Triple the taxes!
Bum, bum, bum.
Squeeze every last drop out of those incident musical peasants. So, once again, this would be a big edit chop. Mm-hmm. But there might be something for double the taxes, triple the taxes, squeeze every last drop out of those insolent peasants. Cutting musical.
But why?
Yeah. And now this one is absolutely going in. Mm-hmm. Taxes, beautiful, lovely taxes. Blah, blah. Probably once again cutting that for, or maybe not. You know what you're getting into if you're getting our Disney Robin Hood inspired domain. Maybe there should be a few bwahas in the write-up.
There should be a few bwahas in the write-up.
So that's gotta be
gotta be something.
An ideal or a bond. Mm-hmm. Who go in the phrase, my dear counselor, rob the poor to feed the rich. And then we have the, okay, and once again, this is absolutely going to the, enough, I am king.
Oh, these are all so good.
Yeah, right, like, it's gotta be, King Richard, I told you never to mention my brother's name.
That's gotta be the bond.
That's gotta be the bond. Yeah, that's gotta be the bond.
Everything is about his relationship.
Yes.
That's might not necessarily be that one, but the bond, because I was thinking about this, and the bond has to be something about Richard.
Yes. Like, there's the taxes, the obvious, his bond is to beautiful, lovely taxes. But really, like, the psychodrama. Mm-hmm. Even with the tax, even that first scene in the carriage is that he kind of wants to prove he's better king than Richard. Because Mummy always loved him best.
Yeah, so, like, even more than his bond to Robin Hood. Yeah. Even more than his bond to Mummy. Like,
I absolutely can have the King Richard. I told you never to mention my brother's name. No, I agree. I think you really hit the nail on the head there with it's gotta be, like, that's the most important relationship that motivates him and guides his action.
Yeah, because I wasn't gathering the quotes for this one, but I was thinking about what his bond is, and his bond has to be to Richard.
My trap is baited and set, and then revenge!
I love him so much.
I was really thinking that hard as a flaw. Because, that's even, like, he keeps, and he hisses out, like, another trap, like, that just, like, he's always doing these traps for Robin Hood, and they always blow up in his face. So when I saw that quote, I'm like, I'm going to suggest that as a flaw.
Yeah, that's, we'll go through the rest, but that is a strong candidate.
Sheriff, I make the rules, and since I'm the head man... Anyway, it's a silly scene, but I want at least one quote where he's like, I'm the king, so I can do what I want.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? Scar was kind enough to give us, I'm the king, I can do what I want. And this same kind of abuse of power, kind of childish using of power... I wanted some quote that expresses that. So this is a very silly scene. It's when Baloo is poking him with the knife and saying he needs to let Robin Hood go, but we have that sheriff, I make the rules.
Yeah.
Friar Tuck, it's Robin Hood, I want you, idiot. Oh, I'd give all my gold if I could get my hands on.
That would be a bond if it weren't King Richard, so.
Yeah. And then I feel like this has got to be in here somewhere. This crown gives me a feeling of power! Power! So give me a cruel chuckle. Power. Mother always did like Richard best.
I have a dirty thumb.
So yeah. I wanted the mother one because once again that's the whole psychodrama. But I think it is really about the Richard.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we've got a great bond. We need a role playing trait, an ideal, and a flaw.
One other one, kind of along the lines of if I can throw one.
Oh yeah, go for it.
One that actually jumped out at me when we were watching it was hiss. No one sits higher than the king. Must I remind you?
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm add to the list.
That was even one where, like, he has the malice on his face when he's doing it. That was the one where I'm like, oh, you're getting a glimmer of him as an actual villain.
Right, yeah. Yes, you deliberately dodged.
So that was one that jumped out at me as a possible
Yeah, I could see that, yeah.
But, oh man, there's so much good
so
stuff
much.
here.
Everything's gold. Mm-hmm. I want to include all of them, just to include all of them. Our first multiple-page Darklord write-up on DM's Guild, because it's just, all of his things are like a paragraph of quotes.
I feel like the ideal would be either rob the poor to feed the rich, or this crown gives me a feeling of power! Power!
But we've got to work in beautiful, lovely taxes somewhere.
We do.
How about the crown gives me a feeling of power as the role-playing trait? Because just that. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Forgive me a cruel chuckle.
So you want beautiful, lovely taxes is the ideal?
If that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
I mean, we got to. We have to work in. Beautiful, lovely. And that can do I can composite them. I can have that beautiful, lovely taxes. Rob the poor to feed the rich.
Yes, that's true.
So that's the nice, you gotta composite that into his
Excellent.
ideal.
And then, flaw, we've got the making a trap, we've got the I'm the headman, and we've got no one says higher than the king.
Yeah, those are all good. Those are all very good flaws.
So, which is going to be our go-to? Which is going to be more helpful to the GM?
If you are the GM, you're role-playing Prince John, and you're trying to say this is the thing that's going to lead him to make mistakes the PCs can take advantage of, that's going to, like, the PCs are going to be able to notice and work into their strategies.
As much as I like my trap is baited instead of revenge, I think that takes too... it needs too much context. Context.
Yeah.
I can talk.
So probably either no one says higher than the king, or what was the other? I make the rules. So I'm the head. I like the no one says higher than the king.
Cool.
Like, as you mentioned, there's the actual malice, and it's also tying into the sort of kingship that really it's just about trying to sort of force people to respect him.
Yeah, and it's so much about the appearances, and it's so petty. It's like,
such a petty
Hiss is like getting up to kind of like look around, and he's not even letting him do that. So it's... And
even, the whole, that's also a flaw, not just the arrogance, but the whole, like, no, he's actually gonna, like, not allow his minions to be their most efficient.
Yes.
Because of this very petty. Yeah, so I think that's perfect, sweetheart.
Thank you.
All
Hamstringing Hiss, even though Hiss has no hamstrings. He manages.
This is a rare appearance from both Future Tom and Rachel.
Yes, the return of the DeLorean for both of us.
Future Tom. As we were editing this, dear listener, we realized we failed as podcasters.
We did.
We made a fundamental failure in our analysis of what are the best quotes for Prince John's role-playing trait ideal bonded flaw. Specifically...
flaw. We would like to issue a redaction and apology. Because there is clearly only one choice for flaw.
Yes. And we said this in the initial list of quotes. The problem was when we were going back and discussing it, this quote was the first one I'd had, because it's so good. So it wasn't on the main page of quotes. So we kind of weren't looking at it. But in the official write-up on DM's Guild and going forward, despite what we just told you a few minutes ago, in the past, the flaw, of course, can only be, I am king, me.
Because then you get everything you're going for with those other quotes, plus a temper tantrum.
Yes. Just, it's got the wonderful... If you have to say, I am king, you're not really king. Demanding that you're king, it means you're not king. And the fact that it then takes the form of a temper tantrum. I am king. Just, it's everything we want to say about Prince John. It's everything you need as a flaw to present to your PCs if you are running Prince John. So we will now return you to our regularly scheduled podcast. And we hope that there are not future corrections that will be inserted in that part of the episode. So that gives us our Prince John. He was relatively simple to do because he was just
amazing.
A big man baby. Oh man, just the genius of the crown is too big.
Yes.
Right? Like, everything we are trying to say about him as a character is communicated with the image of the crown is too big. And he has to, like, poke out his ears to hold up the crown, or it slips around his head because he is too small. He is just such a small man.
He's such a small man.
He's so small. But everyone knows it, and everyone treats him that way. And so there even is that element of relatability and tragedy and that little wince of sympathy of everyone knows exactly who you are and treats you with the respect you deserve.
Once again, in the villain's book, there was a bit where the animators were saying that basically the villains were the victims in this movie.
Yes.
Because Robin Hood is so competent. And
so competent, so proactive. Yeah. So this was very simple. We're not doing really anything different with Prince John, except saying his situation in the movie never ends. And honestly, that's even worse for him than he is breaking rocks in striped pajamas. Yeah. So at least that gives him closure. The area we had to do a lot of adaptation, and there was a lot more work and a lot more research and stuff, is our section on existence and life in his land of Nottingham, which we will talk about in a section that we like to call
The Land. The Land. While the people have no love, respect, or fear for Prince John, they have an abundance of all three for the followers of the vanished Robin Hood. These outlaws, who call themselves the Merry Men, were supposedly defenders and protectors of the people when Robin was leading them, robbing from Prince John and his cronies to return their taxes to the poor. While the Merry Men still do some of this, they also make it their mission to root out collaborators, and their definition of the word grows looser by the day. The Merry Men make their home in Sherwood Forest, and the Sheriff of Nottingham has been unable to find their encampment. Multiple forays into the forest have ended with his men butchered. The lucky ones were punctured by countless arrows, slaughtered without ever catching a glimpse of their attackers through the foliage. The less fortunate ones, well, the corpses I saw on the road, savaged by massive teeth, are not an unusual sight. From the wild tales of beastmen in the forest, I concluded that at least some of the Merry Men have contracted lycanthropy since Robin's death. Were Prince John's enemies confined to the forest, he would have trouble enough. His own oppressive taxes and heavy-handed reprisals, however, have ensured that Nottingham teems with the Merry Men's sympathizers. I heard multiple tales of soldiers, tax collectors, or even palace servants murdered by the mob in broad daylight, and rumors of townsfolk deliberately infecting themselves with lycanthropy to prove their loyalty and serve the cause more effectively. In response, the terrified Prince John can do nothing but hire more soldiers, and raise the taxes ever higher in order that he might pay them well enough to ensure their loyalty. There is one final, tangible sign of the people's true loyalties, a growing cult that has sprung up around the memory of Robin Hood. The arrangement of arrows at the bases of the trees were not left behind in haste or as a threat. They were an offering. There are constant whispers that Robin Hood was a powerful archfey or nature god whom Prince John failed to kill because he could not die. This folk religion is, of course, illegal, but that does not prevent the people from leaving offerings, carving graffiti, or carrying arrow relief tokens beside their hearts.
Every town has its ups and downs. Sometimes the ups outnumber the downs. Not in Ravenloft. Which now Nottingham is a part of. Yes. So, not in Nottingham. And it's really nice because we have these two big iconic locations, and those play very well into what we are doing with the domain. As we mentioned, we're very much this idea of it's kind of the setup of a guerrilla war, that you've got this city with the castle that is the center of, like, control and sort of Prince John's order, and he has ostensible control over the city of Nottingham, and the only place he really has control is the castle, and then there's the forest. And outside of Nottingham is Sherwood Forest, and that's a place he has no control at all. Mm-hmm. And that is, if he sends his men, they're going to die. Unless he sends a whole giant parade of rhinos and elephants. If he wants to travel through the forest, he needs dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of guards. Mm-hmm. Anything less than that, he has no control at all. And this is an area that is kind of tying in the Torment. He ostensibly rules this land, but really not at all. Yeah. He doesn't rule the forest at all. Robin Hood is the lord of the forest. And even the city of Nottingham, he doesn't really rule there. Like, he's not technically sort of a foreign occupier, but he kind of is in the setup of being the phony king of England.
Yeah.
It's like he is invaded and occupied, and everybody that isn't directly on his payroll hates him and resents him and mocks him and is, like, working as much as they can to overthrow him.
And doesn't see his reign as legitimate.
Yeah, exactly. So we have, once again, ostensibly he controls the city. At least in the city, he rules there. But, like, not even really there. Like, the only place he really rules is the castle. And even then, as we mentioned, they laugh at him behind his back. If he's not in the room, they'll sing Phony King of England, because they all think he is a huge chump. So, like, he doesn't even really control the castle. And then we do have, we're going to talk a lot more about that dichotomy, the forest, the city, but then we have the middle, and that's where we are doing Friar Tuck. That he is sort of the man on the inside. Like, most of the merry men are spending all their time in the forest, but Friar Tuck is the one that kind of is in the city helping the people resist Prince John.
And part of why we wanted to do that is because in order to do this as a horror setting, we are having to make the merry men darker than they are, obviously in the movie, because the movie is extremely cheerful, but even in
they throw pies at people's faces, mostly.
Even in most versions of Robin Hood, we're having to make the merry men be a lot darker. And we didn't want to do that for Friar Tuck.
Yeah.
Because, number one, we love Friar Tuck, but number two, also, he's held up so much as being this symbol of goodness and generosity and charity, so we didn't want to morally compromise him in any way.
So he's also the main one. We see Alan-a-Dale kind of in the town, but Friar Tuck is the only character, I was watching for this, that he's the only one we see both kind of in Robin's camp and in the town. And we have the big post-tournament, or kind of all the townspeople come to Robin's camp. But in the beginning, the scene with Robin Hood and Little John's, also Friar Tuck is there. And then he's also the one delivering the money. Like, Robin Hood and Little John have robbed the royal coach, and Friar Tuck is the one going around giving the money to people. And Robin Hood comes into the town, but he's always in disguise. But Friar Tuck is sort of the one, he's kind of our transitional figure. So we also have the church as his kind of area sort of representing the middle, that it's in the town, but this resisting Prince John.
It might work well. It seems to be kind of a chaotic good, since it's the force of resistance and aligning itself with Robin Hood. So if you're doing the canonical stuff, probably Morning Lord, but you've got many, many chaotic good names at your disposal.
And also, this idea we don't want to more compromise Friar Tuck. We've got that gives an interesting plot hook, an interesting tension your PCs can come into, which is he's kind of growing uncomfortable with the darker merry men. That the merry men are getting darker, and Friar Tuck's not super okay with this, because he is sort of our 1 foot in the city, 1 foot in the forest bridge figure. So we've been talking about these two core parts of the domain. The relationship between those two parts is where we get a lot of the interesting stuff, the forest and the city. The forest where the merry men live, the hideout, and Nottingham. And the forest is where we really can start to bring in a lot of stuff from other versions of Robin Hood, and also where we can get a lot of our, hopefully, making this not just a cool gaming setting, but a cool Ravenloft setting. So a lot of our horror and our horror-adjacent ideas. So we mentioned this idea that as part of the torment, as part of being in Ravenloft, and without kind of Robin Hood there, the merry men are getting more and more and more brutal. That you're getting these much more vicious, much more murderous merry men. If people, merchants, whatever, guards, patrols go into the forest, they're not just, have pies thrown in their faces and their pants pulled down and returned tied up on their horses, stripped down to their underpants. Like in some iterations, they're murdered. They are just like killed and dismembered and left hanging in sight of the walls of Nottingham, as a warning to everyone else.
And this is, obviously if you're thinking of this as a Disney version, then it's ridiculously grimdark, but it's kind of for a general sort of Robin Hood setting.
Yeah.
And honestly, we were looking at some of the source material, and I read, I think it's called The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. It was a Victorian children's book. It's not one that I recommend going back and reading. It's some Victorian guy trying to do, faux old-timey, pretty the end. It's not good. But they're really, leaning into Robin Hood and the Merry Men as sort of, chaotic trickster types. You can really see where the Reynard the Fox tie-in is coming from. There's this very, trickster spirit sort of thing going on with them. But to quote the sequel to Magicians, the problem with trickster spirits is they're not very effing funny. And so there's a lot of, like, there's a scene, our introduction to Friar Tuck is he does Robin Hood some, like, minor slight, and Robin Hood flies into a rage and starts attacking him. And it's not until Friar Tuck proves that he's as good a fighter as Robin Hood that Robin Hood's like, oh man, it would be a shame to kill you, because you're such a good fighter. Like, here's some random guy, Robin Hood would just
absolutely would have killed
there.
you, yeah.
Or, like, what's the Miller's?
Mulch the Miller's son.
Yeah. And Robin Hood is talking to Little John. He's like, hey, there's this Miller there. You know what would be hilarious if we, like, pretended to rob him and stole all his stuff and, like, kidnapped him and took him back to our camp, but then we, like, gave him this great dinner while we were there.
Yeah, you know, that's fine.
So just...
comedy gold.
Ramping that up. Just kind of...
Yeah.
Making him a bit more Loki. A bit less jovial trickster and a bit more Loki.
And one area we're kind of trying to bring in some horror potential is, we kind of touched on this with Prince John, that sort of horror of being the occupier in a guerrilla war. Mm-hmm. The horror of, there is this forest, there's this, like, city, and you're kind of safe there, but once you leave, once you go in the forest, you are in this, like, brutal, hostile world full of people that are going to murder you horribly. Mm-hmm. That, like, you are taking your life in your hands if you go into the forest, because that's their world, that's not your world. Prince John doesn't rule the forest, Robin's men do.
You're in their world now, not your world.
And this is taking from, I don't remember I think this was the late 70s or early 80s, this Sean Connery movie, Robin and Marion. And that really is kind of fascinating to look at as a post-Vietnam Robin Hood. Mm-hmm. And even, there is a scene with sort of the arrogant young knights, and they just say they're gonna ride into the forest and take care of Robin Hood. And the sheriff's like, don't do that. And then, like, they do, and the next shot is, like, the horses with the, like, corpses of the knights tied, just processing out of the forest back to the castle. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of merry men as occupiers nightmare.
Robin Hood beats Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But let's take it weirder. Let's take it darker. Mm-hmm. Let's take it more horror-y, and let's do some real, like, deep lore stuff here. So this is what, more than anything, made this setting click for me as a potential Ravenloft setting, as a potential really cool Ravenloft setting. So, okay. Let's talk about history and historiography
and folk religion.
I'm
happy.
Yeah, I'm so happy. And nonsense early 20th century cultism and
Thomas even
this is everything I love. Buckle up, listener.
Just bring in some Star Wars and happiest man on Earth.
So, okay. I really am trying hard not to step on anyone's toes here. I'm trying to, like, stick to kind of what is historically verifiable. In a lot of early 20th century kind of folkloric studies, there was, and I'm very much an amateur in this field, but my amateur scholarship, there was a tendency to take a lot of disparate elements and kind of string them together. And also a very common tendency to point to a bunch of disparate things and say, like, oh, those are clearly, like, remnants of pre-Christian gods. And obviously there are some of that, but, like, not everything is a remnant of a pre-Christian god. Mm-hmm. And this is a great example of that there was this kind of folklore studies going in sort of like the 50s and 60s, tendency to connect Robin Hood with a bunch of other figures, like Robin Goodfellow, or Jack of the Green, that, like, he wasn't really any textual evidence he was connected to, and to sort of say Robin Hood was kind of a folk memory of a, like, ancient pre-Christian kind of Green Man-esque forest deity, and, like, no, he wasn't. Like, there really, or maybe he was, but there really is no textual evidence of that at all. Like, that is as completely, like, he lives in a forest and wears green clothes.
Lincoln green clothes.
Yes, real green clothes for real Englishmen.
Little sidebar, apparently, having read The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, yes, they constantly mention that they're wearing Lincoln green, nonstop. And when you go join the Merry Men, then you're putting your outfit of Lincoln green clothes. And it's because Lincoln green is a specific dye made by a specific cloth here. It was a product placement.
Yeah, it might have been some sponsored content. Might have been some early sponsored content, so.
Wonderful World of Darklords brought to you by Lincoln Green.
Lincoln Green. Real English clothes for real Englishmen.
Anyway.
Right, so
the Lincoln Green man.
So the great thing is we are not bound by historicity. Mm-hmm. We can connect all these dots together. That gives us a lot of cool potential. Because the reason people glommed onto this idea is because it's cool.
Yes.
It's a cool idea. Just not accurate.
Yes.
For history. But we don't have to worry about any of that. So, okay. My pitch. I'm imagining like Robin Hood. He disappeared. His body's never been found. And there's all these stories. Like the Merry Men, of course, insist he's alive. Might kill you if they catch you saying he's dead. Mm-hmm. And insist he's alive. And insist he's in the forest. He's waiting. He's healing. Lots of people have stories about like seeing glimpses of Robin Hood. Or like, oh, this wolf was after me, and then, a mysterious archer shot him, and it was a dead shot, and it was a green-fletched arrow, and then the archer was gone. Like, all these sort of, like, folk hero, like, glimpses of Robin Hood. So, among the Merry Men, Robin's become a kind of forest god, that they're almost worshipping him now as a kind of green man lord of the forest. And they had that more sort of a, like, political title that he was Lord of the Forest, but now he's kind of becoming, Green Man-esque Lord of the Forest. And so that killing of people, that brutality is kind of like shading into human sacrifice at points. So this, once again, is not out of nowhere. You did have a very strong magic, occultic British folklore Robin Hood. There was a British TV series in the 80s where they basically, like, on Beltane, Herne the Hunter, who is the spirit of the forest, chose Robin Hood to be England's champion. So, once again, we're not the first ones to come up with this as like a cool spin on Robin Hood. So yeah, I think that's really cool. I think that also, once again, adds another layer to sort of the horror. It's not just you have these sort of very vicious, brutal guerrilla war resistance fighters, but they're also kind of a weird nature cult that'll sacrifice you to their green man god.
And it gives you a ton of options as a GM for what you want to do with this. Like, is this just complete nonsense? Absolutely none of this is happening. It's all rumor. Is it that there is a Robin Hood's ghost is coming back and doing stuff? Is it that there's some other kind of spirit in the forest that's sort of taking advantage of these rumors and everything? Or, like, maybe it's not even aware of them, or they're kind of accidentally worshipping this, like, archfey without even realizing it? Or you could even do a thing where, like, and we're going to get to this in when we're talking about incorporating the older lore, but that the dark powers are kind of, like, hearing their desire for this god to worship and are sort of creating it for them out of whole cloth, sort of like what we were talking about with the gargoyles in Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Right, exactly, And once again, this is not unprecedented in Ravenloft canon.
Yeah, once again, we're going to talk about this a bit more when incorporating the second and third material stuff, but, like, one example for it is the Morning Lord. The Ravenloft version of the Morning Lord is Chandra's Sunstar. Like, he was a shiny, like, elf vampire who rescued a kid from getting killed by Strahd, and the kid was all like, oh my goodness, it's Lathander Morning Lord, yay. And that's how the Morning Lord got started in Ravenloft.
The religion that most Ravenloft native PCs are now. Just the big one in Curse of Strahd.
Actually worships Chandra's Sunstar. Yeah.
So...
Wake up, sheeple!
Wake up! Burrow Veeple. Your god is a vampire elf! A child can cast light. But wake up, Merry Meeple. Your god is possibly just the sort of psychic echo of your desire for Robin Hood to still be alive, or just, there's so many possibilities, and once again, the idea of the forest as this sort of very brutal, very, like, primeval place, this just adds on to that. So I really am proud of this idea and love this idea. And to really enhance that, to really kind of metaphorize our merry men being more savage, more brutal, more violent.
And also to be the one kind of thing where we are bringing in a little bit of the Disney stuff in the weirdest possible way.
Old Phil Silver. Rachel, what did you come up with about another cool detail we could have about this darker, more folk horror cult merry men?
Well, we want Little John to be a bear, But he can't just be a talking bear.
Right.
But he can be a werebear.
What?
So, yeah, the merry men are lycanthropes.
Mm-hmm.
This is a sign of sort of their connection to nature, sort of their, like, being very feral, being very wild. Like, if you are inducted into the merry men, you are infected with lycanthropy. Like, you're not seen as truly one of them if you were not a lycanthrope.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us a little bit of that animal aesthetic from Robin Hood, but in a much creepier way that's also really emphasizing sort of this oneness with nature, this animalism, and it's just fabulously creepy.
Yes, indeed.
And so the merry men, if they think that you are collaborating with Prince John, they might eat you.
Yes, they might. And the great thing is this lycanthropy has a number of sources. Mm-hmm. Like, they interpret it as a sort of a blessing of Robin Hood that this sort of lord of the forest has made them part of the forest. It might be maybe there was like a patient zero and the kind of the initiation rituals now just involve biting each other. So you're like mixing blood or something. So you get infected that way. It might even be that classic Ravenloft, the dark powers are, they're not being domain lords, but the dark powers are kind of turning their inner evil into external evil, that their sort of bodies are matching their souls as they brutalize, as they slaughter, they're becoming these kind of ravenous beasts. Like in the old material, there's the chart where, like, you roll on it, and we could, like, roll out the merry men do this crime, and then this crime, and then this crime, and end up as lycanthropes. Like, that's totally rules as written in both, I think, the 2nd and 3rd edition stuff. That could be happening.
Yeah, that it was just, you want to act like an animal, alright, the dark powers are watching you, and they're gonna make you an animal, by golly.
And the fact they interpret this as a blessing is just going to be this wonderful dark power delighting, like, they're not gonna see this as, like, a warning sign.
It's not even their birthday.
Or a problem. Yeah, no, this is great. This is good. The more beast-like they are, the more Robin Hood is pleased with them, the more they're blessed by him, so they should therefore be more beast-like. Mm-hmm. And so as our counterbalance to our sort of like apocalypse now, the deep dark forest full of deep dark things hunting you, we have our town of Nottingham where ups never outnumber downs. And in Nottingham, we have that sort of center, that one area Prince John can claim authority over, the castle. And even love in the visual we get, you have the sort of the big moat around it, is that clearly sort of literal island in the center of the city. So
desperately trying to keep them out, yeah.
Rachel, tell us about Nottingham.
Well, we have the castle, and we've got Prince John in the castle, but we've also got Maid Marian in the castle. And there's a lot of space to do some really fun stuff with Maid Marian, because Maid Marian's great. She was really underserved by the movie. And she's in such an interesting position because she's in this position of potential power and privilege, but she's sympathetic to the merry men. So she's able to kind of be a spy, to be kind of their woman on the inside, except kind of not really, because Prince John knows that she was Robin Hood's girlfriend. But what if she's able to, to kind of like persuade him that she's on the up and up, because Prince John is not the sharpest tack in the toolbox. So she's able to kind of do some sort of subtle working against Prince John, feeding them information, that sort of thing. And an idea that we like, again, kind of like tying into this whole... again, that she's a fox person, she's the animalism and all that other stuff, is that Maid Marian was also infected with lycanthropy at some point. And I like the idea of Maid Marian still being, not very morally compromised. And that's just based on what we see in the movie. She is sort of being treated as this, like, pillar of virtue, so I don't see it as being necessarily a dark powers thing. But she's hanging out with the merry men all over the place. She could very easily have gotten infected at some point, maybe even in order to fully trust her, given that she's around Prince John all the time. They're like, if you're going to be one of us, if we're going to, not leave your body out for the crows, then we've got to infect you with lycanthropy.
And this is that kind of person in the middle. That she can be someone who is incredibly sympathetic to and allied with the merry men, who believes in their cause, who wants to overthrow Prince John, sees his oppression of the people, but is not so comfortable with the actions they're taking. Maybe even you have a whole, she knows Robin Hood was not, a god. Robin Hood was her boyfriend. They kissed. They grew up together. He was a man, and he was an incredibly good man, but now these people are, talking about him as a god.
And because he was an incredibly good man, he wouldn't want them to be horribly murdering people.
Yeah.
Like, she wants to help her dead boyfriend's friends. And she wants to work against Prince John. But she knows they're doing really horrible stuff in the name of her dead boyfriend. And she's really not comfortable with this.
And speaking of that kind of overlap between Nottingham and between the forest, we're also imagining, you may have picked up, I love this sort of folk religion thing, that this has kind of become a folk religion. That the idea of Robin Hood is kind of this garbled god of the forest is sort of spilling over into the town. So you're starting to see people, even just the common townspeople, sort of thinking of him as a god and maybe like leaving little offerings in the forest, like going out to the edge of the forest and leaving little offerings, having these little like charms and, you know, symbols, like little arrow charms or little like tassels of Lincoln green.
All of this is highly illegal.
Yes. And will get you sent to debtor's prison. That prison from the climax.
Or worse, in Aging Up.
Yeah, in Aging Up, yeah. But this is growing, this is spreading, and once again, most people in town wouldn't necessarily call him a god. They'd say they're kind of doing a lot of this as tribute or for good luck, but we're like half step from him being just like a formal god they worship.
Yeah.
And
we're somewhere between Carrie Fisher wants you to take your meds and he's a formal god.
And this actually, speaking of becoming a formal god and the way this can work in both D&D in general and Ravenloft specifically, we were mentioning that this sort of connects with Robin Goodfellow, and we're imagining him as kind of in D&D 5e terms, it would be the trickster domain. Because, like, a lot of the powers would be super useful for the merry men. So once again, you have those kind of most committed merry men actually starting to get some of those clerical abilities. And we're, like, a couple years away from there being, like, formal clerics of the Lord of the Forest, of Robin of the Greenwood.
A bunch of our listeners already know who I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, you are.
It's the Overseer! Spoilers! Okay.
A couple people just, like, high-fived the air. So, yeah, that this is... They are, like, 10 years away from this just being, like, a D&D religion with clerics and maybe paladins, and he's Robin of the Greenwood, the Lord of the Forest. He's, like, the god the people worship.
Yeah. And then... yeah, the other stuff with Nottingham is pretty self-explanatory, easy to guess, based on where we see everyone's miserable, high taxes, ups do not outnumber the downs.
They never do.
We don't really see a noble class in Nottingham other than Prince John.
Like Sir Hiss.
Yeah, Sir Hiss, and, you know, presumably there's one because there's somebody that Little John can impersonate at the tournament.
Right.
So you can say that there are other nobles there. But again, if you want to be bringing in some of the historical stuff, then Prince John is also taxing the heck out of them.
Yeah.
So they are not thrilled, but, you know, if they're the nobles who are like his direct vassals, then they're also on his payroll, so they can't do anything about it. So everyone's being taxed out of the wazoo. Everyone is miserable. Ups do not outnumber the downs. But the one thing that we are kind of bringing in on top of what we see in the movie is that we mention the infecting with lycanthropy made merry and has lycanthropy, merry men.
Right, yeah.
So there are some people in the town who were really fervent supporters of Robin Hood who have been granted this gift by the merry men. So, you know, you could pretty much say a whole lot of the named characters from the movie and the characters who, being female, do not warrant names.
They get job descriptions. Widow Rabbit.
Otto and Skippy and who's his face, the turtle, all get names. The Witter Woman is a woman. Toby the turtle. The Witter Woman is a woman. The bunny with the big bow in her hair, she's a girl.
She's sister. Older sister bunny.
Anyway, but all of those people, named or female, have have been infected with lycanthropy at this point. So there is sort of this sense of, you know, even when they're able to keep the merry men out, the guards are up, the moat's keeping everything, they're still finding these, you know, people who have been devoured by rare beasts in the streets. There's crackdowns, there's paranoia, they cannot keep it.
Right.
Every time Prince John thinks that he has them locked up in debtor's prison in silver chains, someone else turns up the next morning horribly savaged.
Yeah. And it's like that whole wonderful, once again, sort of horror of the occupier, that just that having no control. That, like, no, in theory, at least, the city is his sphere of control. But no, not even really. Anyone who helps them, who works with Prince John, who's an informant, will end up horribly murdered, possibly eaten. And maybe the Merry Men have a way of getting into the city they don't know about. Maybe have agents in the city. Maybe it was just sort of sympathizers in the city. They don't know. And that's the horror and the torment of being Prince John in this scenario.
Yes. And
we also kind of mentioned previously in talking about Friar Tuck, we have kind of the church as our sort of midpoint, our balance point. Friar Tuck is, as we said, still kind of on the side of the Merry Men, but is very uncomfortable by this. And now it can also add uncomfortable some of maybe the religious aspect. And he's, it's a D&D setting, so presumably it's not like a monotheistic religion. But, like, once again, he knows Robin wasn't a god. Like, he worships a god or gods. And he knows that this was, like, a man who is probably dead that is now being treated as a god. So, we got a pretty cool, like, brutal, darker Robin Hood. I'm pretty proud of us. We got this rather dark horror setting out of the really delightful Talking Fox movie.
So delightful.
So how do you engage your players in this brutal folk horror guerrilla war Talking Fox setting? Rachel, what do you do with it?
Dread possibilities. It was with great trepidation that I set out to investigate Sherwood Forest itself. Since the Merry Men might have seen me conversing with soldiers in the caravan, I wondered whether I would find myself on their dinner table the moment I set foot in the forest, and I had little idea of how to prevent this beyond remaining invisible for as long as possible. I hoped to ask one of the villagers to help me, but the fact that I had willingly crossed Prince John's threshold without stealing a few souvenirs marked me as untrustworthy in their eyes, and I received nothing but hard stares. However, I did find help in the form of Friar Tuck, a kind-hearted cleric who secretly ferried messages and plunder between the Merry Men and the townsfolk, a dangerous game that had nearly gotten him hanged. Tuck lacked the fanaticism of Nottingham's other inhabitants, and I was able to convince him of the sincerity of my intentions. When Friar Tuck escorted me into the forest, I caught glimpses of half-human, half-animal creatures lurking in the branches above me. Tuck informed me in a low voice that these were illusory duplicates the Merry Men had created of themselves. The real ones were doubtless using a combination of magical and mundane stealth to ensure that we did not see them until they had more time to study us. The Merry Men believed this to be a gift from Robin Hood, he said, but his tone told me what he thought of this theory. The Merry Men never deigned to show themselves to us, although I found multiple small effigies of a man crowned in green leaves, each with offerings varying from a stolen gold coin to a bloody heart. Eventually, I made my way back to the path, where I found the Merry Men had left me a parting gift: the brutalized remains of the soldier who had shown me kindness. The message was clear, and only my disdain for Prince John prevented me from leaving them a parting gift of my own.
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
I want it more than I can tell.
So our first question we're looking at here is, what brings your PCs to Nottingham other than it's got an awesome theme song and one of the best soundtracks of this era? And so there's a couple of ways you could come here. And one is our old classic, you get hired to come here. And the great thing is we've even talked about this moving through the forest, getting anything to the castle is treacherous and would involve having a lot of guards. So very, very, very easily. And Prince John has money, but like, what do you spend it on? Which is another fun little bit of torment, right? That you have all this money, but it's very hard for you to get things to spend it on. So it's very, very easy to have it be they are just doing PC stuff. They hear about a caravan delivering luxury goods to Nottingham, and they have to go through the forest, and then that this way they can discover the whole situation. It kind of organically introduces them to the whole situation. I think this is sort of a good default way to get in there. Like maybe they're hired as guards, maybe they just hear Sherwood Forest is very dangerous, so you should come with this caravan just because there's safety in numbers. But either way, you could have the Merry Men raid, you could really get that brutality, that kind of shock of brutality, but then you get to the city and discover all this oppression and discover why they are raiding these caravans, why they are doing what they are doing, and then you like immediately hook them into the kind of the really interesting Jet from Avatar hook of this setting, which is this people fighting for a just cause, but in an increasingly brutal, horrific way.
And then another connection you have could be through Friar Tuck. He could have a religious connection to a PC or to like kind of a quest-giving NPC. Again, he is a friar. He could be, a cleric of Ezra, a cleric of the Morning Lord, whoever's going to have the most significance to your PCs. And he reaches out for help. All this stuff is going on. There really aren't any good guys anymore. He wants some good guys to come in and help.
Yeah.
And then, similarly, Maid Marian, she is a noblewoman. She is the ward of the king. She has her political connections. She could, reach out and ask for aid.
Right.
Maybe even she wants you to go and talk sense into the Merry Men.
Yeah.
They're not listening to her anymore. She needs somebody who can kind of go out there and try to talk them down, or find some kind of, proof that this isn't what Robin Hood would want, or something.
Yeah, I could easily see this being a very useful way, because once again, it immediately hooks them into the conflict, and it's realistic, especially if you have the, very do-gooder PCs. They would have this sort of reputation as being, good and noble people. Then you have either Friar Tuck or Maid Marian being okay, I know the Merry Men are planning to, sneak into town and slaughter a bunch of collaborators. I'm kind of not okay with that, because they're not really collaborators so much as they are people that are poor and starving and working in the castle. But I can't tell the guards. I can't who can I turn to sort of oppose that and to try and stop that slaughter from happening, because I can't go to the authorities because they're awful. So hey, I learned about this group of very morally righteous, heavily armed transients. That sounds like just the thing I'm looking for to stop these slightly morally compromised people from being killed and eaten, but not be strengthening or turning my buddies into the police.
Please don't murder and eat Prince John's chambermaid, Merry Men. And that's also if your PCs are the type who need someone they can sympathize with. We have a lot of jerks in this setting.
Yeah.
Everyone is a jerk. There are the jerk factions being jerks. It's kind of the conflict of lawful evil versus chaotic evil here. And having Maid Marian and Friar Tuck right from the get-go, even if the solution they have is, you know what, I'm getting you out of here. Nottingham stinks. There are, I'm sure there's a less awful domain than this somewhere. Come on, let's go. Then, that gives them somebody that they can sympathize with. Yeah,
that's a really good point, that our kind of core dilemma here is the idea is kind of everybody's wrong. And of course the Merry Men are much more just. But every day that goes by, they are drifting further from the cause of righteousness and more to the cause of murdering Prince John's chambermaid's family. And having either Maid Marian or Friar Tuck or both then gives you that person who, no, this is the good guy. And then that can be who the PCs sort of orient themselves around.
Yeah.
Or even this whole, no, there is sort of the choices in this setting are not limited to accepting brutal tyranny or murdering household staff. There is a kind of middle way that we have people that represent that middle way, and we can kind of help promote them and their worldview and their, give them a bigger voice in this kind of resistance against Prince John. And that's something a lot of PCs will find very satisfying. So once they arrive there, we've kind of already gone into a lot of what you do there, but that's what you do there. You navigate that tension. And probably the core story you would get here is navigating that tension, maybe something trying to stop some big trap of Prince John's. That's your classic in Robin Hood. We kind of have the Act 2 and Act 3 are both centered around Prince John setting a kind of trap for Robin Hood. And you could have that kind of dualistic thing of stopping the Merry Men from crossing a moral line, and then saving some noble person, some good person, Maid Marian, Friar Tuck, whatever, from some trap of Prince John's. I think then you kind of have the full experience of the domain.
Yeah. So even, where we've set up the Merry Men as being pretty bad, but if Friar Tuck or Maid Marian are on the brink of being hanged for collaborating with them, getting them off to the forest with the Merry Men is at least going to stop that from happening, and you could even spin it as being like, well, maybe if they're in the forest with them, it could be a gentling influence. Like, if you want there to be some kind of happy ending, then it could be that if they're out there with the merry men, then they could work some good on them.
The nice thing is the merry men, it's not a part of Prince John's torment. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have that sort of plot armor stasis of the torment stuff. So, like, what if we just got Strahd a new girlfriend? It's like, no, that is...
Or boyfriend, Escher exists.
Right, yeah. So that is something in this setting that then your PCs can kind of just have a win. Mm-hmm. Like, that brutality, how the Marion approach it. This can be the whole, the paladin, the rogue, whatever. They give the big inspiring speech. They make a bunch of really successful persuasion checks. They can make a kind of permanent, good change in the status quo, and then ride off into the sunset. Which is really all PC can ask for.
Yeah, because, the whole reason that we're having them be bad is to make it more of a horror setting, but if your PCs, like, go do their weekend in Nottingham and then, go off to Barovia or wherever, if it's less horrific in Sherwood Forest itself when they leave, and Prince John's torment now is he's getting a pie in the face all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's still a torment. It's it's not a horror setting anymore, but who cares? Your PCs aren't there.
So the next thing I'd like to do is talk about variant stories. Now, unlike some of ours, we don't have full-on, AUs here, though once again, Robin Hood, you are literally endless iterations of Robin Hood, so there's a lot of possibilities you have, but we always want to talk about the two we always talk about, which are the aging down, the aging up, how to do this with younger players, how to do this with older players, because I absolutely could see this being your kid's favorite Disney movie.
It was our oldest favorite Disney movie for a while. There are a couple scenes of it that I still have memorized. So.
We have a very good friend who I know for a long time was his daughter's favorite Disney movie, and they would say they were going to walk in Sherwood Forest when they were going walking in the woods. So,
and I know there are several of you listeners in our Discord, which if you join our Patreon, you get access to that. Hi. Several of you mentioned Robin Hood being your favorite movie, which, presumably it was when you were a kid. So, you can see this.
So, how do you take this core concept, which is pretty dark and brutal, and adapt it for maybe, an 8-year-old that loves Robin Hood and is playing Dungeons & Dragons and wants to throw a pie at Prince John's face? Well, okay, first off, they don't, eat people, all right?
No.
Some of these, I feel like we don't have to, they're not eating people.
There's no cannibalism
There's no
in your
human sacrifice. They're not leaving, bodies parts strung up inside of the castle. If you like this story we're doing of sort of the merry men going too far, there's kind of two sources I can offer you. And one we've mentioned a bunch of times, Jet from Avatar. Look at those episodes featuring that character. How is he an extremist? It could be that. Mm-hmm. And the other is in Star Wars, you have this character, Saw Gerrera, who, once again, the concept of a lot of his appearances, told you I get Star Wars in, is that he is an extremist. He is the one that takes things too far. He's fighting the Empire, but he's fighting the Empire in a bad way. So you can look at what they do in Rogue One, but especially with younger kids, he shows up in the animated show Rebels. And it is kind of amusingly in Rogue One, he's torturing people that are trying to help him because he suspects they're Imperial spies. In Rebels, he's yelling at people. He's raising his voice. But once again, that could be a good source for this is how to communicate that these are extremists that are fighting evil in a bad way for 8-year-olds.
And I think if I were to do this with 8-year-olds, then I would bring in some of the merry men who aren't in the movie, like Will Scarlet or somebody like that, and have them sort of be the leader of this more extremist faction.
That's a very good idea.
And Little John and Alan Adale are kind of I don't know about this.
If they really want to do your... But it feels weird to do your Baloo impression and talk about string them up on the old oak tree. Or leave them for the crows.
Blood makes the crops grow.
That is a very excellent observation. And the nice thing here is also, if you're doing this for kids, this is not something we've even offered as a possibility for older players, but you could actually bring Robin Hood back.
Yeah.
But no, he didn't die. He is recuperating. So maybe he got hit on the head and has amnesia. Or he's just recuperating in the forest, and you find him and you heal him and you bring him back. Because once again, the wonderful thing is the torment still works.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one thing Prince John believes he's accomplished. So having him do the Oo-de-lally, a pox on the phony King of England in front of it, like to have everyone sees Robin Hood is alive. He sorts out the merry men. But once again, that's not even going off our core Ravenloft metaphysic because the torment is still going.
And then, if you want to still have the lycanthropy, then it's just they're animal people. Like, they can just be their animal people selves, and Little John turns into his bear hybrid form and looks like Little John. And if you're going with this idea of having, Will Scarlet or somebody be kind of the evil extremist one, they could be some kind of creepy animal.
Right, or like they're the wolf, because that's normally bad guys in it. They even have that kind of bad guy association in the animated movie.
Yeah, and Sheriff of Nottingham's a wolf, so...
And also, this is a great setting for kids, because it's a great children's movie. You could really get into the trickster spirit, do a lot of pranks, throw pies, look into some of that material about Robin Hood, where they kind of are tricking and pulling pranks on the sheriff or on Prince John, and like your young players are going to be all over that.
Actually, I'm thinking about it, if you really wanted to do, if your kids really aren't comfortable with Shades of Grey at all, and you want to run this Robin Hood setting, they're just thinking about having this Will Scarlet or whoever be a wolf like the Sheriff of Nottingham. You could have it be that they're a spy.
Ooh, I like that,
and that they're kind of trying to... They're
outside
trying
agitator,
to agitate the merry men, and, make them act out in this horrible way to get the people to turn against them. Because all the people in Nottingham, they're not into this, awful brutality in the aging down version. They're nice.
Yes.
So this outside agitator is coming in and trying to make sure that the people are going to want Firetuck to be hanged by the time they're done with him by Craig.
That's very nice. That does give you a nice, you can kind of have the win, the reveal that turns the merry men away from this kind of path of darkness. So yeah, I think, we could really get a very delightful children's adventure game in this delightful children's adventure movie that Walt Disney gave us. But what if we want to get a brutal, horrible exploration of the pitfalls and the terrors and the horrors of guerrilla war? Rachel, what if we have a bunch of adults who are playing and they are just the kind of people that we would want to play with, that want to explore the terrors and horrors of guerrilla war in this delightful animated Fox movie?
Also, if you want, we mentioned a couple episodes ago that I ran a Falkovnia arc kind of on a dare. If you want to know what about half of that looked like, it was kind of like this.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be talking about various merry men brutality and things like that, so future Rachel's going to come in with a more detailed content warning now. This is Future Rachel. We are going to be talking about the various nasty, brutal ways that the merry men retaliate against perceived collaborators. We're going to be talking about the various nasty, horrible, torturous ways that Prince John goes about stamping out rebellion. And then, hearkening back to The Lion King, we're going to be talking a bit about forced marriage, because that's a pretty common element in Robin Hood stories. If you want to skip any of that, then you're going to want to go ahead almost exactly 5 minutes to about 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 40 seconds. So, really, the big thing is just to ramp up the things you've been talking about already. Just, they're eating people.
Yeah. They just are.
They're just eating people. Just the merry men are eating everyone. And they have the loosest possible definition of what is and isn't a collaborator. Once again, if you're Prince John's chambermaid, you're a collaborator. If
you are the miller selling flour to the palace, if you're a cook cooking for the palace, you're a collaborator.
So there's really having the darkest possible shades of gray going on here. Also, again, getting into that really, mean-spirited pranking, like I was talking about in Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, just to, having this really cruel sort of a bullying sense of the, no, don't worry, we'll give you a chance. We'll give you a chance to prove that you're not a
Yeah.
Just nasty, just show trials.
We mentioned this possibility that the merry men are kind of worshipping Robin Hood and almost developing cleric divine magic, and that it's the trickster domain, and just kind of all the ways that could be really bad. All the ways kind of falling into the hands of a cult devoted to a trickster, a very dark trickster god.
Yeah.
Could go down. That stuff.
Because again, I was reading Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Robin Hood's a monster.
Yeah, wow. He's awful.
And just playing that up. And you could have, with the worshipping Robin Hood and worshipping nature, the kind of, throwing them out into the woods for the night and laughing and seeing if they come back alive, and knowing that they're not because they're using various spells of animal control to send wolves after them, or, like, hunting them, like, they let them loose
right,
and
yeah,
hunting
you could
them.
easily do a, like, you can win your freedom if you get through the night.
Yeah. They're just laughing their gosh dang heads off the entire time. This could get real dark.
Real dark. From the Prince John side, we've talked about, once again, do you lock people in the cartoon jail, or do they get hung? Like, and honestly, even tortured in some of the older movies, like the Errol Flynn Adventures of Robin Hood, they were willing to get a lot more into sort of some of the realistic consequences of defying the king or not paying their taxes. So just a lot of people being flogged, people being blinded, people having like hands chopped off for not paying their taxes, or for like laying hands on the king's soldiers. Just like even that stuff, which was considered more family friendly, they got a bit darker with the stuff Prince John was doing. It wasn't just putting them in stocks in a rainy jail.
I could see a thing where if they think that you're a lycanthrope, they pull your teeth out.
Oh, yeah.
That's having that be a very common punishment. And then the other thing, a really common thing that we see coming up in Robin Hood movies, like, I know it was in Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and I know that they did some stuff with analogous characters in Ivanhoe, is bringing in the idea of forced marriage, and Prince John kind of trying to shore up his rule by marrying Maid Marian, or marrying her off to the Sheriff of Nottingham, or just, some kind of forced marriage thing with Maid Marian is an extremely common trope.
I mean, it gives you gives you a ticking clock, and it gives you a good, escalate the stakes. Because, you get the Prince John, he's awful, the sheriff's awful. Like, how do you, escalate the awfulness?
Yeah.
I will marry Maid Marian in our marriage to Marian. Maid, she will be no longer at our marriage to Marian.
So, it's like we were talking about with Lion King, where we're talking possibly doing a Scar-Nala thing. You could have it be that there's this ticking time bomb, and that's why you need to get Maid Marian out of there, is because she's gonna be forced to marry somebody or other, either to shore up Prince John's rule, or because he's, giving her to the Sheriff of Nottingham as the creepiest possible reward for his service.
Or just, stick it to Robin Hood.
Yeah, stick it to Robin Hood, yeah.
And this is another great, the big set piece kind of ticking clock could be, he has a trap for the merry men, a la the archery tournament, or it could be the big, wedding marriage set piece. Either way kind of gives you this event that's shaking up the status quo. It's not just it's another day in Nottingham. Another day, another couple of guards killed, another couple of peasants imprisoned for tax evasion, another couple gold coins distributed to other peasants. No, this is a major event with the potential to bring things to a head and change the status quo. So with that incredibly grim iteration of this delightful Talking Fox children's movie, we have given you for younger players, for older players, for intermediate players, but we have a couple of final things we'd like to say, a couple of parting thoughts we'd like to give you in a section we'd like to call
Parting Thoughts.
So the first thing we like to do for parting thoughts is we like to talk about the genres of horror. Now, this is something from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. They have this taxonomy of horror, different genres, and part of the domain write-ups there is telling you the genres of horror. And we both agree this is one of the best and most useful parts of the book for a horror GM. Even not necessarily a Ravenloft GM, but a horror GM period. I think that idea of kind of zooming in on the genre of horror is a really useful thing to do.
Yeah.
So we always like to give those for our domains. And this is one of those ones where there's one that I've kind of tipped my hat a little bit. Because I said it 3 times, I think. And I've got a couple of vague ideas, but nothing super concrete. So the one that I know I'm going to put in the write-up first, because it is, I think, clearly the dominant horror of what we are doing, and that is folk horror.
Yes.
And I keep saying folk horror in terms of talking about the sort of horror of the merry men we've set up. And part of that is, in broad strokes, the horror of Sherwood Forest is that horror of sort of you're going into the deep, dark forest, and it's this sort of violently primeval world. It's this dangerous, hostile world you're going into, and that's got some interesting echoes of folk horror there. Mm-hmm. And then to even be more Wicker Man adjacent, we have got the idea of they're forming this, like, nature god cult religion that's involving human sacrifice. So,
Sumer is a Kumanin.
It is indeed. Happy Sumer to all of you as you are listening to this. So, folk horror, most obvious thing in the world. Usually they have 2 for each domain, so I hope we can come up with a second.
I was thinking slasher for the second one.
Yes, that is a solid choice.
Like, because we were even talking about the idea of the merry men hunting people, so I think that is one that could work really well. Like, you could do stuff with the psychological, with the police state, and, you don't know who's a lycanthrope.
Like, if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead. If that's something that interests you, but it doesn't interest us anymore.
Yeah, right.
We'll move on to new things.
Our tone. Like, yeah, psychological police state.
Blah, blah, blah.
I guess.
But I do like slasher, and kind of when we were talking about the idea of them hunting after the people and letting loose in the forest and hunting them, it actually reminded me of, skipping ahead, I didn't have this in my notes for incorporating the older setting material, but it reminded me of Verbrek, which was really kind of the slasher horror domain before we had the slasher horror genre, because that was basically, imagine Valachan, but they're werewolves hunting you for sport.
Just wolves.
So it's just werewolves hunting you for sport all the time. And there's a lot of that going on with what we have in the Merry Men.
Yeah. And the great thing is you could even import that slasher feeling into its strongest in the forest. Mm-hmm. But since we talked about the idea of there being a lot of, like, sympathizers and infiltration in the city, it can be that, like, hunting you through the alleys as well. Yeah. That there's, like, you could get a really, like, intense kind of Laurie Strode knocking on doors in Halloween scene of, like, the merry men or werebeast hunting you through, like, the twisting streets, and everyone is just, locking the doors and shutting the windows and turning out the lights, and if not full on, like, calling to the merry men to reveal your hiding place.
Oh, wow!
And so, yeah, I think you could even get some of that sort of urban, once again, sort of guerrilla war occupation horror under that umbrella of slasher. So that is an excellent call, and I'm happy I am totally pleased to have that be our second thing on the right. Folk horror, slasher. So, then we'd like to talk about what kind of game is suitable for the setting. Some of the domains are really complex. They have a lot of plot hooks. They have a lot of NPCs. You can run games there for months and months and months. You could have a campaign that's basically you're all from this domain. You all stay in this domain, and you just do stuff in that domain. So like Barovia, Darkon, classic examples. You have others that are really kind of for one adventure, like, for random example, Verbrek. That that is just there to be, you go to this big dark forest and the werewolves hunt you for sport. Mm-hmm. And maybe do a kind of if you can get to the border by sunrise, or you can survive till sunrise, we'll let you leave. Maybe you just want to have a werewolf fight. But either way, like, that's it.
They'll say that they're going to let you leave.
Yeah. Even my tummy.
Otherwise, it's no fun.
Yeah. They don't run as fast. They don't have any hope. Where's the sport in that? So, like, but that's it. That's the story. That's what you do in Verbrek. The PCs arrive there, and they get hunted by werewolves. Yeah. And then you have a big werewolf fight, and hopefully find some silver weapons somewhere. And this is one where I do think we've got a little bit more than Verbrek, but not too much more. Like, there's kind of a core story here, and that is kind of coming into this setting, finding the situation, the status quo, kind of trying to have some kind of counterbalance of the extremism of the merry men versus the abusive of Prince John and his men. You can even put that aside if you wanted to just do like a purely heroic merry men one-shot. This could just be like you come in and you like do a heist. Yeah. That's the nice thing is if you don't super want to engage the horror, there's a million billion Robin Hood stories and you do one of them.
Yeah, take out all the stuff that we said about making the merry men dark and scary, and you just have just a fun fantasy setting with kind of a worse Prince John than is in the movie rather than horror. It is our job to give you a horror setting. Yes. So we had to ramp that up. But we recognize that there is a really fun and non-horror
story. Let the record show this is an option that might be a lot more fun for you, because I want to do a Ravenloft horror Robin Hood setting is, I think, much more specific niche than I want to do a Robin Hood setting. Yes. I want to do a regular, like, Forgotten Realms Robin Hood setting. And, like, it could even be this Ravenloft domain, and that's, once again, just your wonderful plot mechanics of... I've been practicing my Peter Ustinov impression, so the mists sweep in, grab you out of Faerun, drop you into Nottingham, you're gonna do a heist, And then they take you back to Faerun. Oh, good job, adventurers.
And you stab him with your sword, and he says, not so hard, you mean thing.
Or even, like, I remember it was one of those Disney, 100 Christmas stories. And they had a Robin Hood one, and it was like the people didn't have Christmas dinner, and the sheriff had a big feast. So Robin Hood and Little John trick him and steal all his food and give it to the poor. And that'd be a blast for a Christmas session.
I feel like this is kind of like what we were talking about with Last Unicorn, where there's, thematically one thing to kind of do with it, but there are a whole bunch of different forms.
Yeah.
That, with Last Unicorn, we're talking about, you could do the whole story with King Haggard and everything, or you could have a Haggard-like villain who's, hoarding magic. And here it's gonna be some kind of heist.
Yeah.
Or it's gonna be some kind of trying to survive the Merry Men, or it's gonna be some kind of, trying to get the Merry Men to be less brutal. It's gonna be something engaging with those themes, but you have a lot of leeway in how you do it.
And the nice thing here with Robin Hood, because the familiarity with the source material, I think this is one where players are going to kind of vibe it right away, like the style. So I'm sure, dear GM listeners, you've had that experience of here's this castle, and you do and they get this thing, and you've had at least one group that's been all right, there's the gate, there's the guard, let's fight. Just kind of fight our way in, and just keep fighting. Oh, look, now we're dead. But it's Robin Hood, and there's the Merry Men. I think their first action is not going to be, let's fight the guards. It's going to be, let's sneak in. Let's put on disguises. They get that that's sort of the story being told here. It's not Robin Hood and Little John draw their swords and charge toward the gate.
And actually, we were going to mention this in Aging Down and forgot to, but it actually fits really well with kind of the heist thing, too. We can mention it here. That if you want to kind of play up that idea of you're heisting all the time, you're tricking them, they're always fooled by the disguises nonstop. You could have it be that Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham and all of them get disadvantaged every time you try to do any kind of disguise or deception roll against them.
And your younger players are going to have a blast dressing up, but their PCs up in rags and doing their Robin Hood beggar voice.
Yes.
Oh, is that the sheriff? I see. The sheriff just totally buys it. And they just get to steal all his Christmas dinner and take it to the poor people. And
which, after reading The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood,
right.
This is completely in keeping with the source material. Robin Hood in glasses is Clark Kent.
In a hat. He puts on a hat. His own mother wouldn't know him. So that would be, it's going to be some kind of heist. That, I think, is a good one-shot, is you come and steal the sheriff's Christmas dinner. Or Prince John is going to buy a golden chair and you steal his gold. He's going to use the chair and give it to the people, whatever. It's a heist. You can also do a slightly longer adventure where you spend more time with the setting. And this I think, would be good if you really wanted to bring in that tension, because that's much more a theme and a story type you explore with kind of multiple sessions, multiple adventures, getting to know the setting, getting to know the NPC. But it should build to some kind of set piece. It should be, we talked about possibly rescuing Maid Marian from some kind of forced matrimony, or even just something you get information, the PCs get information that Prince John has setting some big or possibly archery tournament trap to catch the Merry Men or to catch Little John or to do something. And that leads to the big set piece of defeating the sheriff's men and helping the Merry Men escape.
And then you could also have kind of a story involving kind of trying to help Friar Tuck and Maid Marian find another way. We're not going to rehash it here because we talked about that at length before. But that's another story you could do there, is if you want to have it be, no, it's dark and horror when they get in, but it's brighter and happier when they leave. There's room for that story too.
Right. And another nice status quo change, if you wanted to have a big set piece, kind of a la the archery tournament in the Disney movie, is this whole rescuing Maid Marian and having her go join the Merry Men in the forest. And that, once again, that's no effect on the torment. So that is a big status quo change you can make even in the logic of Ravenloft.
Yes.
For younger players, it's bring back Robin Hood. That's the core story.
Yeah.
Even if you're just doing a one-shot, that's got to be what the one-shot's about. Because they go in, they hear Robin Hood's missing, Prince John claims he killed him, no one's seen him. That's got to be what you do. It's got to be they go and they find Robin Hood and they bring him back.
Yeah.
Let's say you've been practicing your Peter Ustinov impression, even though you are not doing a Disney Kingdom Hearts style venture. You are in that situation I described. You are running a regular Ravenloft game, but you would like to incorporate this story because you think it sounds pretty cool, and Prince John's the best. So, Rachel, how could you connect Nottingham, the silly cartoon lion movie, to pre-existing Ravenloft stuff.
This is one where it's not so much that we can get into, like, the big, like we were doing with Snow White.
We sure were.
Yeah, these are the Wicked Queen's many relationships with Ivana Barisi. There's not anything like that, but there are some thematic things that you can do if you want to kind of be hooking it into other setting elements and story elements from Ravenloft to make it kind of reflect things that you may have done before. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that this is going to come up in the incorporating other setting elements section. The Church of the Overseer in Darkon. It has a very similar thing to what we're doing with Robin Hood here, with this kind of cult that's coming up and starting to worship Robin Hood, and it starts out as being completely fake, but then it starts getting spells. And in the older material bingo, there was a whole thing where the gods of Ravenloft may or may not be real. That was kind of left up to the individual GMs. And if the gods weren't real, then the dark powers were kind of the ones who were the gods and the ones who were granting the abilities to clerics and whatnot. And that also meant that, you know, maybe they were real, but the dark powers also could step in sometimes. That was why you could get people who are just completely being the worst clerics in the world, but they're still getting their powers.
You mentioned something like this in our Hunchback of Notre Dame episode.
Yes, we did.
Which, if you haven't listened, you can probably guess what that was in reference to. You should, it's great. I know it's long.
So, in Darkon, there was a whole thing where there was a Kargot agent was creating this false religion sort of as a means of social control. And so with the Church of the Overseer, it was made up, and they said, oh, well, we don't get spells because the Overseer doesn't work like that. He doesn't need these vulgar displays to kind of force people's faith. But they had as a possibility in a plot hook that maybe some of the true believer clerics of the Overseer start getting powers. So that could be a really interesting thing to do, and especially could be a really interesting thing to throw at Friar Tuck.
Yeah.
Because he knows Robin Hood isn't into the stuff the Merrymen are doing, but suddenly they're starting to get power. So does that mean that they have Robin Hood's blessing? And no, it doesn't. It means they have the Dark Powers blessing. But that's going to be a real crisis of faith for Friar Tuck that's going to be interesting.
Or even like a real, like, interesting fracture point in that relationship with the Merry Men. If he's like, okay, I know Robin Hood isn't a god, so I know this isn't coming from a god. So what's the obvious conclusion? It's coming from something bad.
Yeah.
But you guys are not going to listen to me when I make that point.
Alternatively, we mentioned that maybe there's some kind of archfey that's kind of taken over for Robin Hood and whatnot. You could say that they're starting to get warlock powers, basically, because they made this pact with his archfays. If you didn't want to go this weird, esoteric, like, dark powers.
Ravenloft, like canon.
You could do that. Another thing we mentioned earlier that there's some stuff in Nottingham that kind of ties into some of the stuff that was in older Falkovnia. And this lets you do something like we were talking about with Beauty and the Beast, where you could have some of the thematic stuff from Falkovnia without it being so darn Falkovnia all the time.
A noble goal.
Because the problem with Falkovnia is like, woo.
So darn Falkovnia.
It's so darn Falkovnia. Like, I get the appeal of a man's inhumanity to man domain. I get the appeal of a domain where you get to punch Nazis, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's real. It's really a lot.
And one of the themes that it actually did sort of have this Heart of Darkness thing going on, because even though it did have this, like, big fascist, jackbooted empire thing, it was surrounded by all these very thick forests that were full of kobolds. And, you know, Vlad Drakov's curse was that he could never win a military campaign, which meant that his highly trained creme de la creme soldiers are constantly getting their butts handed to them by kobolds, who are just, like, hiding in the trees, just setting up these horrible ambush traps and massacring them. And we have done some real fun Heart of Darkness stuff with that. Or you could just pick it up and move it over into Nottingham and not have to worry about session zeroing Nazis with your players.
Now I'm wondering, like, York, I want to do Falkovnia because I'm on some kind of bizarre scavenger hunt where I have to run all the domains. I'm in, like, the premise of my game is they visit all the domains, and Falkovnia's on the list, darn it. Then what if you're, like, running Vlad Drakov as basically Prince John? Like,
oh my god!
Like, what's a guy just, like, taking a lot of what we're doing and reskinning it would be a way to, like, basically, yes, check, Falkovnia happened, but, like, it's just goofy. Like, it's so... This is probably...
I will conquer Darkon!
Yes, I am King Vjör! Me! Not so hard, you mean thing.
Oh, Aslan, I'll show him who wears the crown!
Like, just that could...
Merry Christmas, Aslan, this is our gift to you.
Yes, it is. And just doing the Peter Ustinov, like, really having some of the, like, descriptions and imagery, you're like, oh, holy, wow, we're doing Robin Hood. Like, we're doing Disney's Robin Hood. I think, like, you could then take a lot of the sting out and still check Falcone off your list. And so, like, look, we did the man's humanity to man domain. We did the talking lions in humanity to talking warthogs and chickens domain.
I know at least one person has run Vlad Drakov as Nandor. I don't remember who. I'm sorry, I can't credit you. But, the one other thing that seems like it could be a place to bring in other material, but where I would advise against it, is you do have the whole King Richard going off and fighting in the Crusades, and that's why he's away, and it seems like a really good place to put in, oh, well, this is the place in the Ravenloft Corps where he is. He's off, slaying vampires in Barovia. He's, doing whatever. But if you do that, then there's the chance that he's going to come back, and the PCs might say, oh, well, we have to go find King Richard, and suddenly that's a valid plot option. Right, yeah. And as soon as he comes back, the torment is over. So, as much as it would be fun to kind of sit down and be like, okay, what are all the, things that he could be doing, like, shoring up this person's defenses against Falcone or whatever. Right. I wouldn't give King Richard a specific Ravenloft thing that he's doing.
Like, it could be a way to get you into Nottingham if you, like, run into some of King Richard's forces fighting vampires in Barovia. But then, once again, that's too specific. That's like, oh, we gotta search Barovia, find where King Richard is, get him. No, that even that much of a clue of, like, you meet some of his knights in Barovia. It's like, no, that's too much. So I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I think King Richard should be off. Whatever war he's fighting, it's off in whatever land Nottingham was originally.
In the mist. Who knows the vagaries of time.
He's off fighting a war in Faerun somewhere, and he's going to be real surprised when he comes back and his kingdom is gone.
The final thing we like to talk about is the strengths and challenges of running your game in this domain. So, strengths... there's a lot here. It's an archetypal story. Like I said, it's one of those just immediate, people know this, people know the characters, people know the setting, people know the basic dilemma, or even we kind of mentioned, adventurers are going to get, like, the vibe, the type of adventure this is. They're going to get this as a heist, this is disguises, this is sneaking around, this is not just draw your sword and start fighting. Also, the fact that it is so archetypal, the nice thing is it's not like this one specific iteration. Like, you have a lot of variety that you can do. We're drawing a lot from the Disney one, but we are saying, kind of opening this up to, you don't have to have Little John sound like Baloo. He just needs to be like a big guy. He can be nice, he can be mean, he can be fierce, he can be gentle. You have, like, a lot of possibilities to draw from.
Yeah, we haven't watched a lot of the various Robin Hood adaptations, but, like, I think the Russell Crowe one is a lot darker. Yeah. So if you go for one of these much darker versions, you can basically just port those guys over straight into this and just not be doing a Disney thing at all and be fine with it.
Right. And you've also got a lot of potential sources for NPCs beyond the ones we've seen in the Disney movie, and also even just for plot ideas.
Incidentally, I could not find much in the way of horror Robin Hood adaptations. I was looking because I wanted to plunder them for ideas, and I could find lots of, like, gritty Robin Hood adaptations. Yeah. But I was looking for straight up horror Robin Hood adaptations that I could plunder, and there really wasn't anything there. So please, listeners, if you know of one, pass it along because I want to read it.
It's not a full horror, but I looked at a comic series called Nottingham. And it's, like, would be on, like, Netflix or Roku or whatever, categorized as more thriller than horror. It has a lot of horror elements, but it's kind of like the Sheriff of Nottingham is the main character, and Robin Hood and the Merry Men are basically serial killers.
Ah, nice.
So, like, it's really kind of leaning into the sort of, some of the even stuff we're talking about with sort of the, like, brutality and horrific things that can come from this idea of these vigilantes that are fighting corruption. So, once again, not capital H horror. It's more like dark thriller, kind of serial killer, even like CSI type story.
Speaking of the Merry Men as serial killers, that brings us into our challenges.
It does.
Which, if you're doing a Kingdom Hearts going from Disney domain to Disney domain style campaign here, you don't want to do this Robin Hood.
No,
this is not at all Disney's Robin Hood. Disney's Robin Hood is so fun, it's so delightful, and this is not that. And Ravenloft is kind of inherently not going to be that.
Yeah. Do the aging down version we talked about, and I think you can get that satisfying Robin Hood experience, but that's not the ideal Ravenloft version. And that's just kind of a square peg in a round hole, like trying to get like an ideal Ravenloft version inspired by Disney's Robin Hood.
Yeah. And with most of these movies and most of these domains, we've had a pretty easy time of it because the villain is so central. And even the ones where they're not, we're kind of able to juice their part a little bit more, like Gaston. Or King Haggard. And with Robin Hood, it is very much his movie.
Yes.
He's very much the center of it. And even, you'll notice when we're describing the genres of horror here, all the horror elements that we're really interested in, they're coming from the Merry Men, not from our ostensible Darklord. The horror of the setting and the Darklord torment that he's trapped in is being surrounded by the Merry Men. So it's actually kind of his torment from the movie.
Yeah.
But the movie is so much about Robin Hood. So it's like we mentioned in the beginning with the villains book we were reading, that the villains are very reactive and Robin Hood is almost bullying.
Yeah.
If they weren't so despicable that it was
as Rachel mentioned, very in keeping with a lot of your like classic Robin Hood literature.
Yes, but not so much in keeping with Darklord.
Right, yeah.
Prince John, he is a good Darklord, but he is so reactive and so much of the horror stems from the Merry Men instead. So, could be a fun change of pace, but it does mean that it doesn't have some of that capital D domain feel that we get from a lot of these.
Right, it's worth putting in the challenges section.
Yes.
Before we rejoin our narrator and find out where she's going next, we're going to have a little side note about how long it's going to take her to get there.
Yes.
So this is our anniversary, as we mentioned up top, and we wanted to do it right. We wanted to do a proper episode. But we have got kind of a banana summer coming up. We've got a lot of travel plans, family stuff.
When this episode drops, we are going to be preparing ourselves for a total of 30 hours on the road?
Yeah.
In the span of 2 weeks?
Yeah. So that is obviously kind of putting a dent into our recording, editing, things like that.
Please offer up any prayers, good vibes, long-distance hugs, sacrifices to Robin Hood.
Yeah.
As we embark on this 30-hour road trip with 3 children.
Oh boy. See how many children we have when we get back.
Might sacrifice one of them to Robin Hood. They might sacrifice us to Robin Hood.
Yeah, more realistically, knowing her children. So, we are not going to be doing July and August with regular full domain write-up episodes. We are instead doing a program we call the Dog Days of Summer, and this is kind of going to be 2 what we would classify as bonus episodes, one for July, for August, so there will still be the new content on the 13th of every month. And each of these is a format of bonus episode, kind of the pilot for a bonus episode series going forward. So we will have the long-anticipated, long-awaited, long-threatened Book Club of Dread pilot, which, once again, if you are those anonymous people on Red Circle that are very interested in us doing this thing, congratulations, you get your wish, and please email us your contact information so we can give you all of our stuff.
I think what we're going to do, actually, dear Red Circle listeners, because you've been doing this for a while.
You're real committed to Red Circle.
You're either very committed to Red Circle, very committed to your anonymity, or don't like Patreon.
Yeah.
So there is an option on Red Circle to have exclusive subscriber audio content. I'm going to go ahead and set that up. If you're already our Patreon, don't switch over. We're keeping our Patreon up. And I'm going to tell you right now, our Patreon's going to be better because it's not just audio content.
Yes.
If you're trying to decide, should I do the Red Circle or the Patreon, do the Patreon. We're just setting up the Red Circle because clearly a couple of you really prefer the Red Circle and we want you to get an e-patrons only audio content we create. So...
That is going to be our July episode, is going to be extra long to make up for the extra short August episode we're going to be doing, which is our first of a series we're very excited about called The Peddler's Tales. And I don't want to say too much more other than go back and look at the series title we're doing for this summer program, Dog Days of Summer.
Yes. And we will tell you, number 1, Hocus Pocus, the all-new sequel, prominently features a dog, and it's bad.
Yeah.
Number 2... One thing that we want you guys to be prepared for next month when we do Hocus Pocus, the all-new sequel, is that when we do these Book Club of Dread episodes, we are going to have themed beverages.
Oh boy, are we.
And we want the cocktail and mocktail options to be equally delicious because we know that some of our listeners don't drink and we don't want it to be either you get the delicious alcoholic version or you get to sit at the kids' table and have soda. Yeah. So for our first episode, we are going to be making Hocus Pocus Punch. There is going to be a link to it in the show notes. It is juice, seltzer, sherbet, and then if you want to spike it, you can. Mm-hmm. It's delicious. So if you want to drink along with us, then that is what we are having.
So that is what's coming up, and then that will give us time to do our vacations, and then get back, start working on our next capital E episode, our next Ravenloft domain, which we're very excited about, and you'll be excited about too. I'm really bummed you have to wait like 3 months for it.
But not so bummed that we're going to be recording in Alabama.
So that should be ready to go, and we'll kind of resume back to our regular schedule in September.
Yes.
And once again, there will be the content on July and August, and the July one's pretty long, but it will be until September to get our next domain. Mm-hmm. So, if they decide they want to tell us they're an anonymous Red Circle donor, or they want to share their own Hocus Pocus Punch variants, Rachel, how can they...
If you want to tell us about those Robin Hood horror...
Yes, yeah, right.
Well, you can email us at wonderfulworldofdarklords@gmail.com. You can find us on either Facebook or Tumblr at Wonderful World of Darklords. You can go to our Patreon, where for some reason we're Wonderful World of Darklords 651. I don't know. I think I made a mistake setting it up. Sorry about that. I'll let you know, as one of our patrons knows, we can be kind of slow to respond on Patreon because for whatever reason it does not send me notifications on my phone. But we get there eventually.
Yeah. And if you like how we have adapted Robin Hood, the Herculean task of adapting Robin Hood for this, for Ravenloft, especially trying to kind of adapt Disney's Robin Hood for Ravenloft, then you can read some other works we've adapted. I've taken some horror movies and made them into DM's Guild adventures. If you like the way we were very considerate of your young Robin Hood loving child players and giving them a satisfying adventure, we have some very good, like, running spookier games for kids resources on DM's Guild too. If you just search for Tom Kohler, or if you're looking at the domain right up for this domain and look at the more by this author, you'll find those things.
And then for me, I have a picture book, Mother Ghost Nursery Ranch for Little Monsters. It's exactly what it sounds like. You can also go to my website, www.rachelkohler.com, and find some of my short stories for adults, most of which are available online for free, and sadly, none of which are horror retellings of Robin Hood. I need to get on that.
Stay tuned. Keep checking the website. Only thing you have to do. Maybe you'll get lucky. It'll show up one of these days. If you're listening to this far in the future.
Clearly an empty market.
Yeah,
there,
right. So, until next time, we hope that your ups outnumber your downs.
They're not going to next month.
Yeah.
Sometimes ups outnumber the downs, but not in Hocus Pocus and the Only Sequel.
Thank you for listening, and happy gaming.
Parting thoughts. I entered Nottingham believing that anyone who stood against the despicable regent would be worthy of respect and admiration, but left convinced that Prince John and the merry men deserved one another. Perhaps in the days of Robin Hood, things were different. Today, however, Robin Hood is a myth, and his followers are desecrating his legacy as surely as Prince John is desecrating Richard's. I am making a brief stop to resupply before the next leg of my journey, and I'm writing this report from a combined inn and foundling home called Sunnyside. All I can conclude is this. Prince John is a sad, strange little man, and he has my pity. Regards, D.
Fascinating how this worthless Prince John makes even the taxes of Gundarak seem reasonable, and Vlad Drakov's conquests respectable. An occupier is nothing more than one who warms an oversized throne, while the uncomfortable weight of a borrowed crown forever slips off their brow. An occupier who is as craven as they are weak, and uses their position to support a gluttonous lifestyle, is not only a direct insult to the people they are responsible for, but, more importantly, the true ruler of the land. Since John is incapable of maintaining obedience without bribery, his reign will only last as long as the royal treasury. A treasury I highly suspect is enchanted or cursed, as even gold will only inspire the bare minimum of loyalty to those that clearly are undeserving and unfit to lead. It is commendable that my little scholar attempted to survey Sherwood Forest, despite the apparent dangers within. The information provided is intriguing. What I know of Robin Hood's history, employing such tactics of trickery and illusion would amuse him greatly, yet I doubt this particular outlaw would look favorably upon the savagery also employed by these so-called merry men. If the entity responsible for these boons is Robin Hood, then his spirit has been corrupted. Not an uncommon occurrence for the dead that linger within these lands.
This has been The Wonderful World of Darklords. We have no affiliation with Disney or Wizards of the Coast. All music recordings used in this episode are in the public domain and were obtained through museopen.org. Titles and links are in the show notes. Dialogue for Yensid was written by Aslan Rex himself, who you can follow on Tumblr at darklord_Aslan. The Wonderful World of Darklords logo was designed by Haylight Jones. You can find links to their work in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show, look for us on patreon.com or find our tip jar on Red Circle. Thanks for listening. And then another connection that you could have would be via Friar. And then another connection you could have could be via...
Maybe this is our stinger.
And then another connection you have could be through Friar Tuck.